I'm Jim Casey. I'm a trustee here with the library. And I want to welcome you here. A couple of announcements. We've this Sunday, Marathon Sunday, and marathon ends right here. And we'll be having book sale out in front, depending on the weather, I guess. But people stop by if you're down in Marathon, buy a book. And next Tuesday, our talk will be quite interesting. We're going to have a couple of pretty distinguished folks in the legal and political world. Richard Cohen, retired judge, Richard Cohen will be here, expert in the Constitution, and political science professor, and Seth Singleton will be here. Their topic is a republic, if we can keep it, but can we under this Constitution? And they're both quite knowledgeable on that topic. It should be quite interesting, and you're invited to come and maybe share your own views too, doesn't matter. So it's, for this event, we're recording it, and Kate is running the online portion. And for those of you who are online, if you have questions, please use the chat function. We'll get at the end. We'll have Q&A at the end, and I'll pass around this mic for people that want to have questions. It's nice to use the mic because then the online people can hear it too. So our speakers tonight, you see the topic from Friends of Acadia. We have Laura Gibson, who she is a vegetation manager with Acadia. No, excuse me, I'm in the wrong thing. She's a coordinator, Wild Acadia coordinator. That's the program, the cooperative program with between the park and Friends of Acadia. She has a background of project management, public outreach, coordination. She was formerly with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's, NOAA. It's a Monitor National Marine Sanctuary in North Carolina, up in the Outer Banks, living out there and halfway across the Atlantic. And says, at least MD Academy was, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And longer term, the MDI native Jesse Wheeler, who he is actually the vegetative project manager at Acadia National Park, and went to MDI High School, graduated there, and even worked with the YCC, the Youth Conservation Corps program in the park as a high school student and during the summers. His degrees from the University of Vermont and Antioch. So over to Jesse Lauren.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having us here. I am Lauren Gibson. I'm the Wild Acadia coordinator, and with Friends of Acadia. Friends of Acadia is traditionally the philanthropic partner of the park, but we also support the park through programming. And so my office is actually at Acadia National Park, along with some other FOA program staff, because I work with the resource management team very closely. So it makes more sense for my office to be in the park, embedded in the park, versus at the FOA office. So just, we think of Friends of Acadia as managing donors and members and things like that, but also supporting the park through programs like Wild Acadia, which we'll be talking a lot about this evening. I just wanted to mention the logos at the top. So Jesse and I are representing Friends of Acadia and Acadia National Park, but the restoration efforts that we'll talk about, everything is also done with our third partner, which is the Schoodic Institute. So we really work together on all of these projects very closely. So it's really those three organizations that work together on these restoration efforts. So just an outline for tonight's presentation. We'll talk a little bit about where the restoration efforts are happening. I'll give you an overview of what Wild Acadia is. We'll talk about the restoration sites, restoration strategies that we're using in the park, we'll kind of summarize what we've talked about, look forward through the next steps, and then we'll certainly have time for question and discussion. Here we are, Acadia National Park. I know I don't have to spend much time on this slide, but And we're going to need to tell you that it's one of the smallest national parks with some of the highest visitation. You were here this past weekend, you lived it. So, yeah, it was quite a busy weekend and it's been quite a busy summer and just, you know, it seems to be, there's not more space, but certainly more people coming to visit. So that is, a challenge, certainly when you're trying to manage and restore and things like that, manage these resources with increasing visitation and also offer, you know, good experience for everybody coming, but also protect the resource. So the Wild Acadia initiative is interdisciplinary, so it involves everyone within resource management at Acadia National Park, so vegetation, wildlife, social science and visitor use, air and water quality team, everybody that's there. It's very interdisciplinary, partnership based. Again, Acadia National Park, Friends of Acadia, and Schoodic Institute, and really, it's looking at a changing climate. So how do we restore these areas, knowing that we're seeing changes and we only anticipate changes to continue? So it's watershed centered, meaning we're going to talk about 3 specific locations. But that's just kind of where the specific projects are happening now. We are looking at these restoration projects more holistically, so from a watershed basis, so from the tops of the mountains down into the wetlands and saltwater marshes and the wetlands. It's forward thinking, meaning that when we talk about restoration, we think about restoring something, but we're not looking to the past. We're not restoring something to a past state. We're looking forward, again, understanding that we're seeing changes, and we're trying to enable these environments to become as resilient as possible in the face of the changes that we're seeing. They're also, these restoration efforts are learning based, so they're experimental, and so through restoration, we are doing restoration, but learning as we go. So allowing ourselves to do restoration, but learn at the same time and tweak things if necessary as moving forward. Again, these 3 partners, it wouldn't be possible without the partnership that we have. These are just the mission statements of all 3 organizations, but I like to think of it as, you know, Acadia National Park is kind of the laboratory. That's where the science is happening. Schoodic Institute provides the experimental design and the data analysis. Both Acadia National Park and Schoodic Institute offer boots on the ground. They're the ones doing the work. And then Friends of Acadia offers assistance via funding, and then my role, which is coordination and helping to share these restoration efforts through communication. So this is a little bit about how decision-making is made through the Wild Acadia initiative. So there's a framework called the RAD framework, and it's resist, accept, direct. And it's really beneficial because thinking about a changing climate, it's not a one size fits all. The same answer is not going to be the best answer, depending on what challenge you're faced with or what problem you're trying to solve with the goals that you have in mind. So, you know, perhaps in one instance, you're going to try to resist the changes that you're seeing. You're going to build that trail back exactly the way that it was before it got washed out, something like that. You might accept what's happening and just let that trail go, or you might direct it. So maybe we want to introduce a species that we would like to see here instead of allowing something to happen on its own. So thinking about it just gives you some options. This is the next slide is just kind of a summary of the RAD framework. Kind of helps to like solidify your thinking about it. So if you have a sailboat, if you're just gonna accept what's happening, you can put down the sails, turn off the motor, and you just let, you know, the conditions take you where they're gonna take you. If you want to resist, sometimes that means you're just gonna turn on the motor and just plow right through those waves and get to where you're trying to go. Sometimes you want to direct yourself, so you might put up those sails and, you know, allow the wind or capture the wind to take you where you want to go. So just kind of an image to help you through that framework. So these are the restoration sites that we're going to be talking about this evening. So the Wild Acadia initiative focuses on these 3 locations. So the summits of Cadillac, Sargent, and Penobscot, the Great Meadow Wetland, and Bass Harbor Marsh. And again, like I said before, they're watershed based, but really these 3 specific locations, again, just lumping the summits together, these 3 locations are where the efforts are happening now. So Cadillac, Sargent, Penobscot summits, they're identified with the stars on the map. And I don't have to tell any of you, subalpine environment, there's vegetation that's growing on the top of those summits, but it's very fragile subalpine vegetation. And just knowing that we're getting more and more visitation as time goes on, that puts more stress on that very fragile environment. So that's kind of one reason why, focusing restoration efforts on the summits is important. Great Meadow Wetland, it's the largest wetland in Acadia National Park. There's a lot of infrastructure there, the Nature Center, Wild Gardens, Sort of Hot Spring, and then also a historic network of trails and old roads exist there too, which is why the hydrology in that area has become so problematic. We're getting more rain all at once. That environment's not necessarily able to handle all of the rain with the infrastructure that's there, and so we're seeing a lot of flooding, we're seeing droughts, and so that's all part of that system. The different, like the trails and the road system, along with the culvert and things like that we're seeing in the system, along with the changes in our environment, is really putting a lot of stress on that environment. And so that's also because it's so visible. It's one of the most beautiful, most popular spots in the park. So it made sense for us to focus restoration efforts there so that they are visible and we are able to communicate those efforts with the public. And then Bass Harbor Marsh. So Bass Harbor Marsh is the largest salt marsh in Acadia National Park. It's an estuarine environment that's influenced by the tides, and located in Bass Harbor Marsh is sweetgrass, and culturally important species. And so that is driving some of the restoration efforts that's taking place in Bass Harbor Marsh. Also invasive plants, and additionally the same kind of human modifications that we will see at Great Meadow have also been part of Bass Harbor Marsh. Jesse's gonna take over.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. All right, awesome. So we've got some orientation to the sites that we're working at, but what I'd like to do now is take a little bit of time to talk about the approaches that we're taking. So we've also wanted to introduce not only the sites, but sort of the issues, right, that are going on there, the natural and the cultural stressors and challenges that we're seeing within those landscapes. And so while there's a lot there, and thinking about how to make decisions on where to go with the resist, accept, direct framework, and uncertainty about future climates and funding cycles and all the rest, there's a lot there. So what I'm going to try to do is provide a few examples within these 3 different restoration strategies or kind of approaches there's some overlap, certainly, and we're using these in multiple sites, and so I'll try to suggest where we're doing this as well. But anyhow, so we have resource stewardship, which is essentially kind of a little bit of that classic restoration model of what we're doing to protect a place and keeping it kind of in that status and in that state. Ecological restoration, or active adaptive management, and then hydrologic restoration. So clearly this is going to be ones that are around the wetland sites and not as much around the summits, but thinking in that kind of landscape scale. So with resource stewardship, I thought maybe providing one example that folks here at Acadia might be familiar with is the peregrine falcons. So the restoring peregrine falcon populations after they were essentially functionally extinct from this landscape. Then after Endangered Species Act, there was ability to reintroduce these populations here in Acadia. And so in 1984, the Acadia started the program of bringing these creatures right back into the landscape. So the habitat is already there, right? So the cliff faces that they like to hunt in and nest and reproduce. And so that was already there. Let's restore, those populations by bringing in some individuals. And so there's that action that is taken. But I wanted to kind of highlight what has happened since then and until now, 40 years later. There's still resource stewardship, there's resource management that goes on annually. And so it's not always bringing back birds. So that happened kind of early on. Now it's about how do we keep them reproducing? And now it's been successful, they're no longer endangered species, but there still is resource management happening. What that looks like is a lot of people management. And so, as you all know, where they like to nest are right near some of the most popular trails. And so what that looks like is, okay, so if we want to continue to have their populations and their influence on the regional populations of peregrine falcons be successful, we need to ensure that they're not being impacted by visitors. And so that's where we close trails during certain periods of time, things like that, continue to monitor the population, banding them, and so forth. So sort of a classic example, I think, of resource stewardship. But what I wanted to highlight tonight are invasive plant management, summit vegetation and soil restoration, and education and visitor use management. So with invasive plant management, that's a program that I'm in charge of, but it's been happening for over 40 years at Acadia National Park. It's one of our kind of, I guess, flagship resource stewardship programs in resource management at Acadia. One that employs several seasonal staff working at over 100 sites, 24 species per year that we're working on. What this is that we're doing with invasive plant management are identifying those high threat invasive non-native plant species that threaten our native ecosystems. Use different integrated pest management strategies to remove them. So that could be looked at as sort of a resist model, certainly. But I also wanted to highlight it is a climate adaptive approach also. And to kind of, the reasons for that are because as the climate warms, that usually favors invasive species over natives. So if you allow them to get a foothold, they'll take over. As we have higher disturbances, in particular in our forests, but also our wetlands, so that can be wind throw, storms and things like that remove the canopy. When we have, in particular, invasive shrubs, like what's in these images here, and are kind of what the main problem with invasive plants or invasive shrubs at Acadia, when they engulf the understory, we don't have the next generation of trees. And so it can kind of halt that transition into a future forest, even if it's different tree species. And then I also wanted just to introduce here these images that are of Glossy buckthorn, common name there, Frangula ulnis, which is our most challenging species. Last year, it was over 50% of our time was just removing and working and monitoring this species. And it's also kind of the character that is highlighted in actually all 3 of these restoration sites, but in particular the wetland sites. So it invades our wetland and forest understories. And then to kind of introduce what summit vegetation and soil restoration is like. Lauren mentioned on our summits in particular, looking over images from decades and looking at visitor impact studies and things like that on the landscape around where the road comes up and kind of that summit area. We've managers have known for a while that there's impacts to that sensitive vegetation, and then we've been seeing vegetation and soil loss from the trampling, and then exacerbated by erosive forces like wind and rain and things like that. And so the park started in around 2000, setting up some of these passive restoration efforts. And what I mean by passive is kind of setting up barriers where people can go and can't go, to try to see if the vegetation grow back. So that's kind of like around the Summit Loop Trail, sort of the cave trail. But we didn't see much vegetation growing back after 10, 15 years. So around 2015, we're working with some other partners in Native Plant Trust to research methods of restoration of how can we bring back plants, what kind of methods could be used. That was about a 5-6 year study that ended in 2021 to research some of those methods. Definitely found that soil was key for plant growth, mostly looking at vascular plant growth, but also the non-vasculars with moss and lichen. We recorded the growth as well. Having erosion control, fabric and things like jute mats was helpful. And then there was also testing of seeding of native seeds and plants to see what, and while there actually wasn't any significant difference during that study, as we move into have now moved into our next phase of restoration methods testing on these landscapes, we're still trying to see if there's a certain seed mix and a certain seed rate that we can use to kind of influence seedling growth. And then I also wanted to mention, this is an opportunity for community engagement. So as we, and what I mean by that is kind of folks of the community, so volunteers, visitors, other staff that don't necessarily have in the office very much to help us out, because now what we're doing in this phase with the Save Our Summits campaign is where it's moving not away from Cadillac, we're still concerned about that, but also taking a look at more remote summit areas where you don't have a road to bring soil up, you don't have to bring plants growing in a greenhouse or anything like that. And on Sargent and Penobscot summits, you have trails. And so that's where we're engaging with volunteers. So over the last 2 years, we've had, how many volunteers? Hundreds. In the hundreds, moving over 8,000 pounds of soil over the last 2 years. And we're actually today, it was just up on Sargent Mountain, we're already starting our second year of applying those restoration areas there. But it can't, with soil that was staged up on the summits, but that couldn't have happened without having volunteers through now what has been a weekly program to get groups together to hike up the soil in their backpacks, kind of pound by pound, essentially.
Did any of you participate or know somebody that did Save Our Summits? Yeah, so there were not only visitors, like it was accessible to visitors that came to the park, but yeah, there were a number of locals that participated in a summit that went almost every week. So yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And then to kind of highlight what does education look like and visitor use management strategies. So what that means, so again, this is kind of like classic resource stewardship, but what that is identifying these areas where the resources are being impacted, and while that is of our objective to protect those resources, we also need to balance how visitor access and experience is also happening right in those same landscapes. And so what that might look like is taking a variety of different approaches. Some of it could be just education, just verbally. So that could be from summit stewards, that FOA hires summit stewards that are up there every year communicating, leaving up trace principles, things like that, right? It could be signage that talks about these sites. So bringing that knowledge to people when they're in these environments, so that they know kind of best practices about how to interact and how to and just kind of be in those spaces that is beneficial to them and the resources and the landscapes that they're trampling around eventually, or physical barriers. It could be that. It could even go as far as limiting access to where people are even allowed to go, right? Or think of Cadillac Mountain Reservation System and sort of spacing out how many people might be there at once by having reservation systems, things like that. And so I also we also wanted to put in here where we're also engaged with the University of Maine and social science researchers on new ways of figuring out what's going to work best for educating and communicating to people that are hiking on these trails, in particular in sites like Sargent and Penobscot that don't have, a barricade or don't have many signs or ropes there at all yet. How people are interacting with these restoration sites now that we've set them up, so that we can better set that experience up so that it benefits and works for the people as well as the plants and sensitive soil we're trying to keep up in those summits.
I was just going to add, one thing that I think is important when we talk about this project is that you know, there's a lot that they're learning, you know, about is seed necessary, what about the soil, like the soil that's being used is so important. But I think when the restoration sites were established last year, it was like less than 24 hours. And there was a big boot print, right, in this newly established restoration site. So it's, you know, there's all these things to think about, there's all these variables, but if there's not like the human use part that's also considered and that's also managed, then, you know, you're still gonna fight this battle. So, yeah, so that's kind of an interesting piece to it too.
Okay, so I'm kind of gonna move into ecological restoration. And we kind of couch this as learning while doing. And so what I mean by this is kind of, again, like what Lauren mentioned, is one of the characteristics of Wild Acadia, is that this is a learning-based approach where we're going to do these restoration efforts while also doing them in a way that we can learn the best from them, lessons learned of what works and what doesn't. And some of our partners describe this really well as kind of, particular science partners, is that we don't really have time in a lot of these places to wait 5-10 years for a research study to happen and then find out what are the results and then apply that to, you know, so that we just don't have time in some of these places. We need to kind of act swiftly if we want to maintain what we have or enhance what we have. And so that's what we're going to try several strategies at once, test those together, and then after, you know, kind of certain intervals, we'll see what works, and we might need to amend those strategies as we move forward. So that's our learning while doing approach. And so 2 examples within that, that it focuses on climate adaptation. Again, now we're up to the summits. So Chris Meadow, our climate change adaptation scientist with Schoodic Institute, that's heading up a lot of the research on the summits and some of the wetlands. So one thing he's looking into is this plant here in the photo on the lower left, which is cinquefoil, which is a very common low shrub in these environments now. But with other researchers that have done models on climate refugia in the future, so about the turn of the century or even 50 years from now, what's the suitable habitat based on the projections of warming of temperatures in particular, its suitable habitat diminishes greatly to a couple of places, and one place being the summit of Cadillac Mountain. So the thinking is, okay, so if we're involved in this restoration work, which has a really long-term horizon of success, should we also be thinking about some of these plants? And so this is part of our restoration efforts, this 3-tone cinquefoil, because it does great right now. Do we need to be thinking about diversifying its genotype in particular, so that it maybe needs to be, you know, adapted to a warming climate? It could need to be these genomes that are, in some cases from further south, that will fare better in the warming climate. So when, you know, shall we implement those as part of our restoration, our active restoration efforts? And so he's been testing assisted gene flow by collecting little sample, really like digging up little samples of these of over, I think, 30 locations in New England, from warmer sites and cooler sites as well as locally, and then planting these out in these test beds in near our restoration areas on Cadillac Mountain, as well as on Schoodic Point, so get different temperature profiles, mixing them all up and then looking how their growth has been. It's kind of interesting. The preliminary results are that he hasn't found any significant difference actually of the different populations. So that might suggest that the genetic makeup is all kind of mixed, and so or there's a lot of plasticity, and they can kind of, even if they are kind of distinct in their genetics, they are still able to handle these shifts in temperature as long as they get enough water. That's kind of been the thing. As long as they get enough water, they can do well. But that's something that kind of needs more study. So I just want to kind of highlight that as we think of within these restoration efforts, if we are setting ourselves up and the conditions up best for the future, we also need to be considering what these either genotypes or even species that are going to be most suitable into the future. And then another one that we can, in this kind of ecological restoration approach, are looking at suppressing these invasive plants with native plants. So I mentioned that we do invasive plant management. We've been doing that for decades. We use an integrated pest management approach, which essentially means using a lot of different tools in the toolbox and monitoring the population and kind of keeping on it and having that long-term perspective. But even with mechanical and chemical and manual methods, in some of these locations, in particular with glossy buckthorn, that shrub that I introduced earlier, in our wetland systems, is that we keep finding this reinvasion. So in Great Meadow wetlands, for example, we've been managing or removing glossy buckthorn since about 2008. And there's still areas where it's still there, it still holds on, it reinvades or it can regrow. And so we're looking for what else can we do? What other tools can we have? And so there's research that suggests that actually, if you're able to shade them out, then they will reduce their performance, and that can buy us some time. So we know we're not going to eliminate glossy buckthorn with some of these strategies, but we're looking at how can we supplement our current efforts so that we don't have to be in the same place every year. Maybe we come every 5 years. And so what we're doing here, and again, this is testing all at the same time, a few different strategies are the lower left. These are really small plants right now, but we have about 9 different species of native shrubs. So these are species that are native to Acadia National Park that we're planting in small little subplots, as well as native graminoids or grasses and rushes and sedges as well. So those are actually genetically local graminoids from the park. Several different species. And so what we're doing there is trying to see how can shading directly affect the growth of glossy buckthorn, or in the case of the graminoids, kind of taking up that ground space and competitive advantage of them on the ground space. And we're also looking at that versus the control, or kind of a status quo of just doing our business as usual. For that. And so while we're just getting into our second year, we've established now, gosh, what is it, about 21 plots throughout the 2 different wetlands, Vassar Marsh and Great Meadow. That'll take a few years to see some of those results, but there's some other sort of adjacent studies that are ongoing, looking at how much shade actually is required to reduce or suppress the growth of glossy buckthorn that are happening kind of adjacent here. And I will also mention that even after the first year, sort of like you start something out, you learn something right away. One of the advantages of selecting like 8 or 9 different shrub species to see how they'll perform, because we don't really know which one will shade out the best or perform the best. We had a couple of plots in the Great Meadow wetland set up last year. I don't know if anyone was walking around there during spring, but it was really wet. Very, very wet. The Great Lake for a while in the early spring. But anyhow, so we had a couple of plots that were flooded for a substantial amount of time, and several of those shrub species did not do very well at all with that. Some did okay. The graminoids, fine, but some of them did not. And so, already there we're learned. So it was good that we used many different species, and we can also adjust. And we actually did a replace. There was one species that didn't do well in almost all of them, and so we replaced those out with a different one this year. But we're trying them out in sort of wetter environments and drier environments, and so we have hopefully a robust number of plots that we'll still be able to see some of those effects.
So our last restoration strategy that we're going to talk about is hydrologic restoration. And so we're going to focus on Bass Harbor Marsh and Great Meadow for the hydrologic restoration. So we're going to talk about efforts to stabilize water levels and deal with floods and droughts and things like that. But also talk about some of the historic agricultural infrastructure that's in those environments and how that is impacting both flooding and droughts as well. And how our goal there is to kind of step back and really work with our Indigenous partners on a co-stewardship way of moving forward. So within the Great Meadow especially, you know, as Jesse just talked about, we've seen it at super, super high levels. Some of you might have even ice skated in Great Meadow at one point or seen others do the same. So we're seeing these flooding events, and then this summer it was very dry. Some really low water there this summer. So one big project that's going to be happening is the replacement of that too small culvert. That's the outflow culvert under the Park Loop Road. That's the exit culvert for Great Meadow. So right now it's just 36 inches around. And so then when any debris gets stuck in there, it just allows for that whole environment to flood. It's going to be replaced early 2025. I don't know exactly when, but early 2025, it'll be replaced with a box culvert. So that's going to be a 12-foot box culvert with a foot on either side for wildlife passage. And then, so what the hope for that is that right away, that those high water events that we're seeing, the water will be able to exit the wetland faster and not flood. So we're not saying at all that we're going to get rid of flooding in this environment. Again, we're seeing record numbers of record amount of rain at specific times, and so it may still flood, but we're hoping that the duration of flooding is going to be decreased, and that just overall the flashiness of the system, those really high highs and really low lows, will kind of be moderated a little bit. The other thing that exists in this environment, again, we talked about, you know, the Hemlock Path is on the outskirts of the wetland. Then you have the Jessup Trail and the Hemlock Path that goes directly through the wetland. And so those are barriers for the water to move freely through that wetland, which it's supposed to be able to do. So there's also trail work as part of this project that's going to take place hopefully also 2025. So the trail, the Hemlock Path that goes through the wetland right now, it's raised higher than the Great Meadow. So there will be purges through that path, similar to the Jessup Path that goes through the meadow as well. So some purges in the path with some boardwalks that are raised or above those purges again to allow the water to flow more functionally through there. And then this also, again, like when the environment is flooding, we're talking about like visitor use and enjoyment. If we have that raised boardwalk similar to the Jessup Path, then visitors will be able to people will be able to use that, that trail even when we are seeing high water events. So the idea is to increase functionality and continuity in the wetland, but also make it accessible to everyone, even when we're seeing that high water. And I do mean accessible too. So the boardwalks and the trails will be rehabbed so that it is accessible for people that might have mobility challenges as well. The other thing that's kind of exciting is that there's additional trail work that's happening along with this project. So the Great Meadow Loop that is north of the Park Loop Road now will be moved south of the Park Loop Road. And so if you wanted to start at Sortimont and go out Hemlock Path or Jessup Path, you can do the entire loop without ever crossing the Park Loop Road like you need to now. So again, just thinking about visitor use and safety, pedestrian safety, and things like that. So this is really a project that again involves lots of different partners and people at the park. So not only resource management, trails and facilities and you know, things like that. So this is a project that will happen fairly soon, fingers crossed.
Yeah, and then so how do we address agricultural modifications and impairments in wetlands specifically? The image on the left image is of Great Meadow, and you can kind of see these red, it's kind of hard to see, but there's sort of red lines all over the place, and a couple purple ones. That just shows sort of some from some consultants' preliminary look at areas where there's been ditching and embankment over generations and generations. And on the right, that's a picture of Bass River Marsh, sort of the edge of the salt marsh, kind of fringe marsh there. It's not a very good photo of the expansive parts of the salt marsh. But to kind of highlight the salt marsh, what's going on with salt marshes now, and this is regional, and there's other organizations that are looking at restoring salt marshes across the coast of Maine, is that since settlers came centuries ago to this area, these were some of the spots that first got modified for agriculture, whether it was salt marsh hay or even, or in particular to change the hydrology so that there could be other forms of agriculture on those spaces, even before folks started cutting down forests. And so there's been a history of many times, often overlapping kind of network or like piping of, of embankments and ditches that have happened in these salt marshes that have now led to their decline, essentially. And the way that that's kind of worked out over time is that, well, perhaps some of those were working for a little while. There's been kind of subsidence that's happened. Some of them have failed. And so what we have now is a lot of our salt marshes, we have pools. We have these kind of more fresher pools or salt pans that kind of form. And when you our salt marshes should not have too many of those. And what tends to happen is when you have those form, that kind of that pooling of water, you get salt marsh grasses dying back, and you get loss of elevation and loss of peat. That's really good carbon storage, and so you're losing the peat. And basically what happens is when you have that salt marsh dieback happening, our salt marshes can't keep up with sea level rise. And so you bring in the climate aspects to that. Well, perhaps, in some areas, the natural accretion from sediment that comes in with the tides year after year after year can help to elevate like salt marshes. And hopefully that's what, a condition we can see for many of our salt marshes looking into the future with sea level rise as we allow for marsh migration. So that's definitely something, we need to look at. That's not really part of this bit right here, at least in the park, because there's physically space for them to migrate, but it's just that will they be able to with sea level rise, or will they not and turn into mud flats essentially? And that has happened in some areas. So that's kind of a bit of how like centuries of ditching and embankments have led to these stressors in salt marshes in particular, but probably also in some of these freshwater wetlands like Great Meadow. And so that's why where we are in our steps now for restoration are mapping exactly where these are. And then we can use those to see if we can work on coming up with restoration plans that will kind of fix the salt marsh platform, salt marsh surface hydrology. And we recognize this in particular, again, with Bass Harbor Marsh, where we have traditional gathering of sweetgrass just starting up with Wabanaki tribes. And that's a bit of, certainly restored access on that landscape. And we need to make sure whatever kinds of modifications, so this is continued modifications, but hopefully to set the bar higher, set the conditions better for the future, is that sort of works well with sweetgrass gathering. And so it's improving those conditions. So that's where we're kind of at with identifying these agricultural modifications in the wetlands.
So we've reached our summary slide.
Yes.
So this is, these are restoration techniques, the restoration strategies that we've talked about, but really by site. So just to kind of summarize, we've talked a lot about the strategies and talked about different places where they're happening, but this kind of summarizes everything. So, so invasive species management is happening at Great Meadow, all 3 sites, right? But working to suppress invasive species and natives is really happening at Great Meadow and Bass Harbor Marsh. Education and visitor use. Great Meadow, I should probably, in the summits. Coast stewardship, Great Meadow and Bass Harbor Marsh, climate adaptation work at all 3 sites, hydrologic restoration, again, Great Meadow, Bass Harbor Marsh, and vegetation soil restoration up at the summits like Jesse talked to us about, and then community engagement, Great Meadow and the summits as well. So again, we just, we wanted to just highlight while we gave, while Jesse talked about these strategies and gave examples, they are happening in multiple locations, multiple sites that fall within the Wild Acadia initiative.
Yeah, so where would we go from here? What are kind of our next steps in this long-term, long-range restoration effort here at Acadia? So continue to test invasive shrub suppression studies. but with an extra added layer of, let's look at also climate adapted species or genotypes. And what I mean by that are species that may not be, we may be north of their range right now, and so they may be further south, and so from the south, so they're used to a warmer climate, or genotypes of the same species we have here from the south, kind of like how we introduced through tube cinquefoil. The idea behind that is sort of, if shading by shrubs really does affect and help us suppress our invasive shrubs, then if we can utilize plants that have a longer leaf on period, especially later in the season into the fall, this time of year when a lot of glossy buckthorn is still green, and getting a competitive advantage that way, then that can kind of help us. So we're in sort of the testing phase. This could be, you can look at this as kind of in that direct, right, kind of framework on how we're going to direct a future. Is, do we want to use those in these spaces as well? So we're looking at testing that out. For soil restoration, so maybe we need to continue looking at soil amendments to boost the seedling growth. So all that soil that anybody hiked up, it was not so fantastic soil if you're a gardener, very low in organics, and in carbon. It was sterilized, so we didn't have weed seeds and things like that, but kind of poor soil, which actually a lot of our native plants does fine in. But we have, through some pilot studies, we could increase seed germination if we had a little bit of kind of some organic soils in there, or to make it more organic rich. We could change. We can also look at changing erosion fabric. So we're refining some of those methods and seeing what works. And then also kind of sticking with the summits and soils, we've talked to other academics, other folks, restoration ecologists that suggest we should really consider the soil microbiology as well, the microbiome, and also like mycorrhizal fungi and things like that. And we also, since we've noticed that in the Cadillac studies, moss and lichen growth that came in on their own, and some of these areas did pretty well to kind of create a soil surface that keeps the moisture in, and that can actually add as a little bit of a seed bed for new vascular plants to grow. Continue to look at what the role is from that as well.
And then, the modifications on the landscape in Great Meadow and Bass Harbor Marsh that Jesse mentioned, we worked with a contractor to map those this summer, but from there, we're gonna kind of stop and again, work forward, through co-stewardship with our Indigenous partners before we decide exactly what to do with those. Do we purge the roads? Do we fill the ditches? What is the best way to handle, those modifications in the landscape? The culvert that will be replaced in 2025, there are adaptive management teams already in place. So how are we going to know that it's working the way that we want it to work or that it's intended to work? And so there are groups, again, vegetation managers, wildlife, soil and air, water quality, different groups that are already established, visitor use, things like that. So we will be able to look and see what we expect and see if those conditions that we're seeing are actually what's happening, and then work to modify those. So we're already establishing those groups so that we can really be on top of that and watch it closely and make sure that it's working the way that it should be. And then the last one, all of the things in the list so far are things that are going to be happening in the future. And we are, we've been having these conversations about what is Wild Acadia moving forward, like farther into the future. And really, we talk a lot about forest. So, as you all probably know, there are forest pests that are already here. And as we see, again, warming temperatures and a changing climate, what other pests might we see, or how might those pests be expanded or changed, and how might they change the forests in Acadia? So this is just kind of a thought about where does Wild Acadia go after this. We're focusing now on these wetlands, the summits, but again, these are watershed based projects, and so perhaps that's where Wild Acadia goes next, is into the forest and really working with experts on how to look at our forests in a changing climate. And with that, we would like to open it up for questions.
I had a question because you were talking about the quality of the soil that you're bringing up to the mountains and maybe not having the best quality. But you're also doing stuff in the Jessup path and removing soil in order to let water go. Do you ever consider using that soil? Which might have a lot more, organic material in it.
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. Actually, we haven't tested it yet on the summits, but just down low where we get our technicians checking weekly to see how some seed germination studies. We actually use some topsoil from an area in the park that's going to be used for housing, create more housing. So there's gotta be some of that topsoil moving away. So we're already thinking about how can we repurpose. There's other projects actually for this site right here where the culvert's going to. It's not just the replacement of the culvert in the road. That project also includes the upstream and downstream end, and there's a lot of like the wetland and natural environment that we think about. So we're already thinking how can we repurpose, salvage material, as well as plants and kind of engineering with nature from sites that, are going to be kind of disturbed. So good point.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm wondering, I have two questions. One is, are you using AI in any of your predictions and your models of what you're using? And the second one is, I think of deer as forest pests. So do you think about that or, explore that at all?
Well, the first one, AI, not that I'm aware
I would say anywhere would be like in like remote sensing, like looking at like vegetation changes, like on summits and things like that.
Yeah.
Predictive models when it comes to social science and things. I know it's been thought of. I don't know if it's actually been used, but there's been conversations around it.
Yeah, rely on our partners and researchers to doing some of that. So yes, there could absolutely be stressors from native species like deer or others, right, that reach levels that are unsustainable for the forest. So in certain locations around Mount Desert Island, there are likely deer populations, although we don't know what deer populations are, that are, definitely reducing some of the undergrowth. Overall, as a forest, and we use this through forest health monitoring plots that are long-term throughout all of MDI and Idaho and Schoodic, we are not seeing deer browse pressure that is high enough that should reduce the forest health.
Why don't you know your deer population?
Oh, because in the state of Maine, it's usually the Inland Fish and Wildlife that has metrics on deer populations, and those are used from hunting permits. And since there is no hunting on MDI, we don't know. In the park, there was a coyote and deer population study in the 90s that was done. Just a few individuals, some radio tracking, but there hasn't been anything since.
So I have deep property in Southwest Harbor from deer, and I'm very close to Acadia National Park, and I think it's a huge problem. And possibly with all your vegetation and stuff, deer probably enjoy the native species more than the other. So I don't know like what a private citizen can really do about it. I can't stand.
So as a private citizen, you can do something. You can talk with the Maine Inland Fish and Wildlife because they're a state managed resource. So we talk to those folks. There undoubtedly are areas, like I said, because there's different, spruce forest isn't really the habitat that a lot of deer like to be in, but some of the edge habitat that they love. So I see it too on my property.
Thank you for your presentation. I had not really gotten into the eco world that seems to be a part of the park here. I'm interested in being part of the solution, not part of the problem. I want to be a soil hoarder. How do you go about doing that? I never heard of it, and it's novel and certainly make the hike a little more worthwhile if I got to the top and to leave something.
Sure, so this summer, yeah, so were weekly hikes, and so both Friends of Acadia and Acadia National Park advertise those hikes through social media, and I believe on their websites as well, and there was a registration link. So I think just, to see about participating next year, or just be up to date on the different volunteer opportunities and events. If you just, check out Friends of Acadia website, Schoodic Institute, Acadia National Park, if you're on social media, just follow along that way. And all three organizations are really good about posting events and opportunities, and really trying to keep up to date on those things that are available for people in the local communities as well as visitors too.
Not being familiar with historical agricultural infrastructure, I'm imagining maybe that includes
historically were built to get to cultivated areas and, the roads that were probably part of the cultivation. Am I thinking along those lines, or is there more that I'm missing?
No, I mean, you're exactly right. Yeah, just how, the roads that were built to access sort of on, when this area was becoming, this more established as a national park. And then too, even before that, for agricultural reasons, road beds, and then the ditching for agricultural purposes. That's what we're seeing both in Bass Harbor Marsh and in the Great Meadow. So it's these raised road beds that still exist and impede water flowing freely through that wetland environment. And then also the ditching, the agricultural ditching that allows enabling water to funnel through to different places that perhaps it's not naturally supposed to be. So yeah, so it's these higher like embankments, and then these low lying areas as well, both in Bass Harbor Marsh and Great Meadow.
Does the approach allow for taking that on and saying, heck with you, Mr. Road?
Yeah, so the contracting organization that we worked with this summer that did the mapping, it's called Northeast Wetland Restoration, and they do a lot of work in salt marshes all around in Acadia and outside of Acadia. They work closely with Maine Coast Heritage Trust, and they've not only they're familiar with not only doing the mapping and identifying that infrastructure, but then also doing the restoration of it. So, we went out to a site at Old Pond where they had been working on a restoration project in a salt marsh there. Not only had they mapped it, but they were already like well into the restoration of that salt marsh. So this same organization does provide recommendations on how to move forward and what to do with the ditching and the roads that exist in the environment as well. But we're just taking a step back again to go a little bit slower again and involve all of our partners and look at it, Bass Harbor Marsh, look at it from like a culturally important species perspective, and then Great Meadow just kind of slowing down so that we're moving forward with Wabanaki partners instead of just doing things and then bringing them in well after the fact. So this organization does have the capacity to do that, but we're just kind of taking it slow right now.
Is the implication there that some of the agricultural improvements you want to leave, they're advantageous?
Perhaps.
Yeah, from my,
Yeah.
from my understanding in the salt marshes anyhow, if you were just to breach all those embankments and fill all the ditches, then you're gonna almost do too much, you're gonna do too much harm again, because of this, how long it's been. That they use the term, so these restoration companies use the term secondary succession with that, and so it's a slow approach, but it is basically using just cut thatch from the grasses themselves over the seasons, and just using that to slowly, basically building up peat is what you want to do. And so it doesn't eliminate all the ditches. And so that's what they do. They look at that and they're like, we can't fill, we can't do all of it, but they just want to get the hydrology just right. With the inflow and outflow, the ebb and flow of the tide, so that the water is coming out and coming in at kind of that natural way. And then same with kind of the pools, like you can't necessarily drain all of the pools, it's not going to work, but some of them that they do. So it's actually, they use a term called runneling, which is kind of funny, but basically make like a small little channel to allow some of those to actually and drain out. And so and if that works, then you don't even need to seed these areas. They will recolonize on their own.
We've got a few questions from the online folks, but I wanted to also note that last March, we had Maine Coast Heritage Trust here talking specifically about salt marsh restoration, and we have that on our YouTube channel. So I'll include that in our links when we send out the recording of this to all registrants. All right. So from Greg Schubert, a USC regarding deer, USDA Forestry Service survey determined that Acadia was probably the only national park on the East Coast that was not seriously impacted by deer browsing.
What about seawall?
Yeah. So, also.
Got some stuff to show.
Right, okay. What are other invasive plants? What other invasive plants are major problems besides buckthorn?
Yeah, so other invasive species, kind of the top, let's say 5, there are mostly those woody plants, right? So like shrubs and vines. So other than glossy buckthorn, the barberry, so Japanese and common barberry, and honeysuckles, the shrub honeysuckles, there's a few, so like Morrow's honeysuckle. And then we also have Asiatic bittersweet vine, which is, yeah, really magnificent looking right now, right? This time of year. We also have kind of in the herbaceous species, Japanese knotweed, which people might also be familiar with, at least along roadways and driveways and things like that. And then the one that kind of started it all in the late 80s is purple loosestrife, so an aquatic herbaceous wildflower that, or not wildflower, invasive flower that still exists in the park. But in areas that it's been managed for the 35+ years, it's at very low levels and kind of that maintenance level that we want to see, where it doesn't require hours and hours and days all of July and August of a seasonal crew focused just on that plant. It can take like a week, and we can, there's very few that are flowering there, but with hundreds of thousands of seeds per plant potentially, and they're like lasting in the seed bank a while, it's gonna be here. Where, a lot of these, our objective isn't to eradicate necessarily, because we don't have that expectation. Maybe from some little sites, if we catch them early, just to get them down to levels that we can manage, and so that the natural ecosystems can flourish.
Yes. So they were just also talking about a Sea to Summit podcast. It's a podcast that you can get through, again, I'll put the link on the registrants email and in the description of the video, and it's a podcast, and I guess there's a new season starting tomorrow, and it's called Sea to Trees.
That's through Schoodic Institute.
Through Schoodic, okay.
Yes, yep.
My question is for Jesse. Is the increase in visitation matched by increase in funding for your work? And do you get out to talk to high school level people in language appropriate ways?
So increase in vegetation does not correlate certainly with park-based funding at all. However, recreational fee revenues, so it's 80% of fees staying in the park, that can contribute to limited, efforts, certainly, absolutely. But not much, so it does help some of our invasive plant work in some areas, but most of this work is funded, it doesn't translate to that. So a lot of this, and like invasive plant management actually has been sponsored or supported by Friends of Acadia for a while. But a lot of the most recent work in the last couple of years has been funded from the bipartisan infrastructure law, ecosystem restoration, primarily in a few other grant sources that way. And So, right, what does that mean for the future? How to, the funding outlook? Who knows? Right now, it's, you know, we're doing pretty well, but I wish, right? I wish it were, you know, something that would translate to that. For getting funding from Washington, let's say. But high school, I did visit MDI High School in the fall to talk to folks that were in their outdoor classroom just about the work that we do. So I've done that, you know, a couple of times, but it's not necessarily a big part of my outreach efforts. But I do like, I think we do try to engage the Youth Conservation Corps, which are high school age, and a couple other youth groups. By helping them out with some of our invasive plant work, or actually they participated in hiking up soil the last couple of summers and things like that. And I try to talk with them about, you know, kind of professional kind of development stuff as well, and give them just sort of a look at what we're doing.
I have a PS here. I'm almost certain it was a plant sale here at the library back in like 1992. And I bought a little plant. I only bought 2 plants. This is when I just bought land, and my retired ecologist biology brother said that it was Japanese barberry, and that it's a host for ticks. Have you heard anything along those lines?
Yes, so there's been research with barberry in particular that looks at incidents of ticks and tick-borne illnesses like Lyme disease. And so yes, higher, I think it's like 40%, maybe it's significantly more ticks versus native shrub system. And it's thought that kind of the environment that like a barberry understory can create with humidity levels and such are fantastic for like the black-legged tick.
And do deer like to eat barberry?
Deer do not eat the barberry, they eat the native plants. So you end up just in sort of this cycle where.
But don't plant barberry.
I won't.
Yeah. Hopefully the message is clear that like, if you're going to plant something, that's great. Go to local places, try, you know, nurseries that sell native plants and try to get as native as possible, and even avoiding cultivars if you have that option.
I have a question. The 36-inch culvert and on a loop road draining Great Meadow clearly contributes to flooding in Cernamon area. But even with that, in big storms, there's significant flooding downstream around the golf course and now the houses down as you get down towards Route 3. And once that barrier is taken away, isn't that going to contribute to even greater flooding downstream?
That's a good question, yeah. So we worked with an engineering firm named VHB, and so they did all the hydrologic modeling and design. And so they certainly took that in consideration, knowing that the water that flows out of Great Meadow goes from Kibo and then down to Bar Harbor before it leaves. And so in addition to the culvert, there's something called a weir, which will also be built. So it's kind of like these arms that kind of go out and like hug the space before the culvert. And then there's just this V-shaped notch. So this part is open and you have these 2 arms, this weir that kind of like hugs that opening. So really the flow is going to be modified by this notch right here, which will be lined with boulders. Again, as we talk about adaptive management, is too much water exiting the Great Meadow, then you can add things to it. Is not enough emptying out, then you can take things away from this notch. So there's more to it than just the box culvert. There's also this weir that's helping to modify.
So a significant pool below the road that can be used to modulate the water
Yes.
flow.
Yeah, it's a grade control device that's going to be
Yes.
engineered, but in a way that we can modify it as
Through a V-notch weir.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, there's one, on these 3 strategies, the red, so, what would be an example of an accept strategy?
Well, you can look at it some different ways. So one accept thinking about the forest pests is to accept as they come in and accept that, let's say hemlock woolly adelgid on right in the background there along the Hemlock Road will devastate and maybe lead to mass casualties and mortality of mature hemlock trees. And so an accept would be to sort of let that play out, recognizing that that's something that would take a lot of resources to manage. And so that would be just sort of letting them go, and then probably just dealing with some of the aftermath. In some ways, we've done that already with red pine scale coming in 2014, or at least confirmed in 2014, and leading to most of the red pines. And so we also recognized pretty shortly after that, and it was already kind of throughout MDI, and there wasn't much we could do to prevent it, even though we did try to slow the spread of these pests. And so then it kind of comes into more of like, okay, so managing hazard trees and things like that, and just communicating about it.
I would just say too, the culvert replacement is also like an accept example. So there's this much more water that's coming through. We're not trying to do anything about that. We're accepting that our infrastructure is too small and we're replacing the infrastructure. So we're accepting that and we're modifying
It's a direct.
infrastructure. Yeah.
How does that relate to Seawall Road and this RAD analysis?
Well, some hypotheticals here, let's see, so. So if you have a road that is being inundated and transformed more frequently, resisting would be to armoring that as much as you kind of can, and keeping the road in the same exact alignment. Accepting could be to accepting the fact that these disturbances are leading to, the road damage, and perhaps that gets to a point that's unsustainable. And so one accept could be to not have that as a road anymore, and access it another way. A direct could be one example. A direct could be, we recognize that there's this disturbance regime that's unsustainable. Still, maybe we have a bridge or something that is something where you can kind of, get out of the way of that disturbance regime, but still having it there in place, but probably looking entirely different and operationally being different.
I like it. Doesn't give you the answer, but it's a way of
Doesn't give you
analyzing.
an answer. That's kind of right. It definitely doesn't. It's tough. It works through these different alternatives.
Yeah.
And then you have to kind of weigh those out. Obviously, whether it's economics or, resources and things that you might have to put towards it, or thinking, timeframes out into the future, to see what might actually be successful.
I don't need that. I think very. Your presentation obviously dealt specifically with Acadia. Are there other national parks that may have similar problems as yours? I mean, minus the difference in full plant material that maybe there could be a combination of mines and that you could use in your particular instances.
Yes, right, sure. Yeah, so this is a great question. So question of, we're one of, 400 plus national park units across the country. What are other folks dealing with? And so we try to reach out. There's not like a perfect platform for this, but there are, some communication groups like Resilient Forestry, Forest Initiative, that's sort of based in the Northeast regional parks, about actually look at invasive plants and actually deer management as well. But some of the similar stressors and issues. We'll say for the summit stuff, when folks are still started out with native plant trust, even before that, to identify the issue, they did kind of look in, the Appalachian kind of community, and there really wasn't, there wasn't much looking at this kind of the same way. So we did realize it was kind of a unique location, or just kind of dealing with some issues that were kind of unique at the time. And so that's why we didn't invest in doing some some localized methods testing for that. So absolutely, there's other restoration projects absolutely happening throughout the national park system. Many different ways. I mean, there's some like river restoration work. There's a lot that are like kind of post disturbance, whether it's like wildfire and flooding, of course. I think it's a bit of a novel approach, with the suppression of invasive plants with native shrubs. That's something that I've asked our invasive plant management team liaisons throughout the park system, and there's not much that's really been done with that. So that is actually kind of novel. But as we go into kind of next steps, especially if we consider these climate adaptive approaches, that's definitely going to be in a kind of a regional perspective, but especially if it's like we're going to possibly bring seed source or plants from another area and use them in common garden experiments to sort of, kind of a controlled environment, but still there's, so there's hope that we'll be engaging, working with parks in the whole region, as well as US Forest Service and some other agencies on those approaches. But great suggestion.
I'll just add to that real quick too, just, the problems I don't think are unique, a lot of places are experiencing the same problems, but I think Acadia really is like leading the charge in a lot of ways. This learning-based restoration is not something that's happening a lot of other places, the active adaptive management. And so when we talk about communication, a lot of communication that happens is, through scholarly journals and conferences and things like that. And, Jesse and Chris Meadow, who's from Schoodic Institute, the climate adaptation scientist, sharing that with colleagues in different places, to kind of tell them what we're doing and what we're learning, and hopefully they can use those things where they are as well. Soil to Summit, Save Our Summits, just telling other places, like we have a lot of volunteers that are willing to hoof soil up to the summits and participate in soil restoration. That's something that's not really happening in other locations as well. And so it's kind of interesting, like not too long ago, we had a call with another national park seeking information from us. So while the problems are not unique, the solutions that we're moving forward with are really pretty novel. Co-stewardship too, Acadia is really leading the way with co-stewardship and managing protected lands with Indigenous partners from the beginning. So there's a lot of aspects that, what we talk about here, Acadia really is like at the forefront of that. So which is pretty exciting.
Well, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Jesse. There's clearly a lot of interest in this, and I'm really glad you had you here to explain this and answer some of these questions for us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.